The upcoming conversation between Anja Foerschner and the artist Carolee Schneemann refers perfectly to everything we have talked about over the past 2 days, and we are extremely grateful for both speakers for attending and traveling all the way to New York. Anja is an art historian and curator of modern and contemporary art with a focus on performance art from Los Angeles and the Balkans, feminist art, and the human body in contemporary art and culture. Anja met Carolee when she was involved in the Getty Research Project Performance Works documenting feminist ephemeral art, where she researched, amongst other things, the documentation, collection, and preservation of early performance works of Carolee Schneemann. Since we have a close working relationship and studio friendship with Carolee, I'm especially looking forward to have her share her experience about the proactive planning of her own legacy, and I'm interested in what she expects from her foundation in order to handle and promote her work in the future and make it accessible for future generations. Please help me welcome Anja Foerschner and Carolee.
Thanks. I want to give a quick thanks to Christian, to Christine, first of all, for the introduction, to Christian and Natalie for conceiving and implementing this very interesting and timely and relevant symposium. And I'm very happy that we're here today, that we're closing this kind of 2-day enterprise that I think has given us all a lot to think about, answered some questions, opened up some new questions. And it's my very, very great pleasure to introduce Carolee to all of you. With Carolee Schneemann, we have here definitely one of the most influential artists of the second part of the 20th century. Carolee has received the Golden Lion from the Venice Biennial in 2016. Meow. Finally, yeah. I want to say, for her great and innovative artistic output, and especially her ongoing and very necessary critical outlook on the gendered nature of not only the art scene, but culture at large. So what we will talk about tonight is something that is very dear, as you will find out, because I get really excited about it, to my heart, which is Carolee's archive. And it's kind of an extension, or in some points also iteration, of a conversation that we had just 10 days ago at the Getty. That was a wonderful evening event, a conversation between the two of us about her archive, and we had a full house, no doubt, because Carolee was there, but I hope also a little bit because of the kind of that reflected on the growing interest, I hope, that scholarship and curators and maybe also the general audience have in artist archives. They're so important for a scholar, obviously, because it gives you such a kind of expanded and deep understanding of an artist's practice, inspiration, methods of working, social, professional network, and so forth. But also, especially in the scope of the event, the symposium that we're here to discuss or to attend today, for conservators to think about the legacy of and the future of an artwork. And so I started working in Carolee's archive a couple years ago, actually in the scope of a different project, and I was so struck and so impressed by the depth and the variety of media, the information that I found in her archive, that I thought that this in itself definitely warrants its own research project. So this is something that we'll talk about tonight. We'll talk about her archive and maybe also in the discussion address some of the aspects of how an artist's archive relates to or can kind of help address issues of conversation, the preservation of an artist's legacy. We will also talk a little bit about, which I'm very particularly excited about, her paintings. Carolee and Christian have an ongoing conversation about the preservation of some of her paintings, which are such delicate and intrinsic things combining so many different media and techniques, which definitely in themselves also pose a challenge for conservation, and then ultimately also about the Carolee Schneemann Foundation. Before we get started, I just want to share some images with you to give you a sense of what we talk about when we talk about Carolee's archive. A part of her archive from the late 50s to the mid-90s is housed at the Getty Research Institute, the Special Collections. There's another part of it that is housed at Stanford University Libraries, and there's much more to discover at Carolis Home.
Yeah, alas, it keeps reproducing itself while I'm asleep, or something happens.
It just keeps
seems to be-
growing.
Yes, I had to buy a file cabinet after all 30 bankers' cartons went to the Getty and then to Stanford, and there's all this material. But I want to thank Anja to begin with, because this appreciation of the work is a very hard one retrieval. I'm not used to the degree of appreciation. I've had to fight bitterly to establish my estimation of my work, that it all comes from painting. I'm trained as a painter. My discipline is rigorous and it's painterly, and it has nothing as such to be identified as performative. So there we go. Yeah.
Okay, and so much more. As we'll talk about in a minute, I personally see the artist, the archive in itself as kind of a part of artistic practice. So in the archive, we find notebooks, we find dream journals. So Carolee kept a journal of her dreams, a pen and paper next to her bed to record her dreams that very often served as an inspiration for your work. So this is really in the archive going back to the very, very beginning. We have drawings, so that doesn't correspond with what's behind us. I need to move it forward separately. We have drawings, we have these little notes, kind of instructions for exercises: roll across the floor, stop, make a little something else, roll, make a roll, and so forth. So all about the interest in bodily movement, interaction, expansion into space. More wonderful, difficult handwriting, I'm telling you.
I'm too bad she likes it. Yeah.
And these are some of my favorites, are these heavily edited scores. So going through the archive and kind of tracing an idea through the various media and materials, I kept coming across these scores that are so heavily edited, thought through, cut up, pasted together. We have this beautiful embellished letter to Colleen Fitzgibbon with a wonderful interior scroll drawing, the color-coded, highlighted address books, exhibition or performance announcements such as Meet Joy. And then just very quickly, which I think are very important pictures, what do you see when you go to an institute such as the Getty and look at the archive? So this is what you would encounter in Carolis Home. This is kind of the organic, kind of amorphous nature of this archive that keeps growing overnight. And then when you go to the Getty, this is what you encounter. So when we were talking last week, you made this wonderful comment about, because Carolee went to the archives with me and looked at some of the material, and you said, it's almost like visiting a relative in a mental institution.
Yeah. Some kind of a hopeful prison, and maybe they'll graduate from there. But the fact that it's available is amazing, and of such, I'm so grateful for the consequence of this, because I never started an archive or collecting material with the sense that it would be of value or of concern, because as a young woman intending to be an artist, as most of you know, I was always told, this is crap, put your clothes on, you can do whatever you want, but it won't matter, and you paint like a boy. Things like that were what I had to sustain myself. And I learned that the more they said, you don't know what you're doing, this isn't Cubism, okay, I think I'm onto something, to hell with them. Yeah.
I'll keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
So talk to us a little bit about, you started your archive very early during your student years, and from the beginning, it has been incredibly substantive. There's so much media in it, so much material in it. So what were your thoughts, the motivation. You had talked to me once about kind of this idea of connecting to the world that you had when you were younger. You had quoted the poets as the kind of major influence in your idea of starting an archive.
Well, the supporters of my collecting material were poets. David Antin, Jerry Rothenberg, Paul Blackburn. For some reason, the poets were really responsive to my texts, and they published them in their very obscure journals in the early 60s. And that was so confirming and encouraging. And also my partner from college years into the 60s, James Tenney, the composer, he had a cohort of musicians who all became quite famous. You would know all their names. And they, with no money, found spaces to present radical works and study them intensively of Ives, Ruggles, Varese, Cage, Feldman. And I would do the posters and do all the mailings by hand, writing everything out and gluing all the stamps on. And then the influences for me in New York City, when we finally escaped from Illinois, was to be sent to some guy named Klaus on East 2nd Street and become part of store days for Oldenburg. And I've been reading Artaud and Beauvoir and Wilhelm Reich, and those researches confirm my sense of what I need to do to rehabilitate my life in a body, a female body, a vigorous, kinetic, determined physicality. And then collecting was always a way of playing with death. You stupid fuck, you're going to take everything. You took my cat, you took our dog, you took the rabbits. Where are the turtles? And of course, in my age group now, everything's being snatched away that made the party work, that made the community, that made us aggrieved and joyful. So the collection is even more determined. I don't really want to do it. I'm a clipper. Some of you might be clippers also. Like, I have to clip what disturbs me. I've got huge piles against patriarchal rules, huge piles of Syria, Lebanon, Aleppo, Damascus. And often these disturbances in the humble domestic field begin to generate the work. What was the question? Why the archive? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Holding on. Well, for you not being sure, it's quite amazing and quite substantial. But I think that this idea of holding on and documenting and makes a lot of sense. And you had actually said to me in an earlier interview that that you were very interested in the subtlety and the demands of the process, and that you try to keep the evanescent elements as they move into realization, since your works are not preconditioned or programmatic. So I find that that very interesting also in looking at your archive, this capturing of this process. And I mean, and this is why I find...
You captured stuff, look at that, yeah. Plus you can take care of it, but I think the evanescence starts because I began as a landscape painter. And I certainly identify with Cézanne's fury over his fading still life. The roses were good yesterday. He comes in to work with them, and they're all crumpled and dying. So I'm very fond of crumpled and dying materials, and also the training as a landscape painter, where I would drag canvas and paints, and my cat would go with me into the woods. And everything was constantly changing. So that inspired what became kinetic theater. I had to respond to this constant transformation that was counter to my thoughtful intentions, but inspired my responses. You know, it's a little bit what David was talking about too. And I was so happy for your talking about indeterminacy and intuition, which has definitely been displaced and degraded, along with rigor, imagination, uncertainty, and all the things that make my life as a painter exquisite. Yeah.
So when I, as an art historian, when I started working in your archive, what attracts me is that I deal with not premeditated knowledge. I am the one who's challenged with making sense, with selecting, with interpretation. I am fully aware that I'm working with both a very professional but an also incredibly personal entity. And it's difficult because obviously no one has done that scholarship before. I'm the one who has to make sense in a way. I kind of also not intruding in your private space, but I'm entering it in a sense. And what I always kept thinking and wondering, and I think that might be a question also that this specific audience and with the conservation issue in mind, is there for you in the documentation a certain hierarchy, or, and I know you hate the word, strategy, or is it really about just, I know, is it really about collecting everything, or is there a process?
No, it's not really everything. When I began to do my kinetic theater works, I realized that everything was escaping me, and the photograph became absolutely essential. It was almost the only way I knew how my intentions had been realized through the documentation. And we didn't, in the early days, have issues of rights or ownership. We were kind of in a process together, and the photographers would make the sheets of images available for use, and I would say, and you do whatever you want with the images also. So there wasn't the conflict of possession or appropriation that we have now. It's so different. Also, we didn't have to have insurance. When I went into St. Mark's Church and hammered ropes and pulleys into all their pillars and suspended 12 people moving back and forth over the pulleys, there was no insurance. Well, the good old days, yeah.
But would you say, because now you talked about the visual documentation as being very important, and I want to move forward a couple slides to Chroma Lodi, because Chroma Lodi is a work where we don't have a video or film recording. We do have some photographs, and we have, it's among the most extensively documented projects that I found in your archive. It has a huge folder that is full, as we can see. That's the wonderful album, the performance album, and then we have scores and scripts. We have these little handwritten notes where you organized the different.
You know what? That's not my handwriting.
Is it Jane's?
Who did that? Anja, you're the archaeologist. Who did that? Huh?
But it's true. Your handwriting is.
It's my ideas. I don't think it's Jim Tenney's writing. Maybe. Okay, more research.
So these different drafts, they relate to different iterations of Chroma Lodi. So there were different versions until you went through, or different ideas you worked through until you arrived at the final version of Chroma Lodi. We have these wonderful costume drawings, very elaborate for each performer. So you were not performing yourself. You had performers that you instructed. And then here we come to the visual documentation. And what is so amazing to me is how close, and I think that is a very good example, how close the actual physical enactment of the piece really relates to the much earlier drawing.
And all those works were conceived first with drawing. The energy of the muscularity in space was what I was trying to depict before I could train anyone to participate and enact these sequences.
So I mentioned that at the Getty as well, and because I find it so interesting also for us to think about in the case of ephemeral work like Chroma Lodi, where we have visual documentation, but we don't have any film or any video recording. These various materials that are in the archive really kind of paint a much more complete picture than just the visual, the photograph. And I've mentioned it to you before that I'm always a little careful about this strong emphasis on the purely visual documentation, because that is only one part of a work. Yeah. Remember when we talked about interior scroll, there's this iconic image that keeps showing up again and again and again, but it only tells this one very small portion of a much larger construction.
And then all of these performative works have sound that was edited, and scores for lighting, and detailed movement, the parameters that would compose a work over its own time frame, like an hour or an hour and a half, once it was really in position.
And we just learned that there might be actually the audio material for Chroma Lodi.
Yeah, somebody who just found that. It's
your friend who was it?
It's in my archive.
Apparently it is. We have to find it. So in the case of Chroma Lodi, now that we looked at the various material that we have in your archive, when we think about it's an ephemeral work, it was a time-based work, it was a performative work. When you think about the future of the work, maybe the exhibition of the work, would you say that the documentation material that can be found in your archive is a sufficient depiction of the work, if it would be exhibited? Or do you feel it lacks something because we don't have the filmic recording?
Well, I never feel that the documentation lacks something because we didn't have video access. People expect materiality that wasn't available to us. So whatever we have becomes representative, potentially, but it'd still be very difficult to reproportion these kinetic works with the sound, with the lights, there's costumes too that I handmade. So there's all these other aspects to it, and they'd have to be gathered and analyzed and given some formal proportion. I don't want to do that, but I would have to definitely come help if you wanted to do it. Yeah.
How we spoke about this before as well, and this is actually a question that I also kind of got from the conservator side. I was working with Rachel Rivong on a paper on Carolee Schneemann's performance works, and one of the questions that she kept asking was the question of reperformance. There's an ephemeral time-based work that I guess that answers the question. Do I even need to ask it? Because no.
I hope no one wants to do that. I mean, everyone does interior scroll. It's ridiculous. It just seems like something you have to go through the way we used to do still lives. Yeah.
You had mentioned when we talked about this issue of reperformance a while ago, you had said that in the case of Chroma Lodi, for example, you wouldn't think it works because it would lack your presence, even though you were not yourself performing in Chroma Lodi. But I find this very interesting, and I completely agree with it.
Well, it's my vision. I'm still very clear, although from what David said, I might get it wrong sometimes, but I'm still pretty clear about sequence, sensitization, the relationship between the participants. As Anja knows, I didn't start to perform in a work until Meet Joy, when I was doing intensive training to my participants, none of whom were dancers after I stopped choreographing for the Judson Dance Theater. None of them were dancers because I wanted them to have a different physicality that wasn't trained or self-conscious. So Meet Joy had a poet, a painter, a balloon salesman, Tommy O'Donnell, incredible, and other people I met in the street, and I liked how they were moving or how they looked. But then in order to teach them from the drawings that were the initiatory material, I had to start participating and moving and demonstrating. And suddenly I was in the middle of it, and I thought, this is fabulous, this is really interesting. And I had done participation in store days with Oldenburg, wearing just a spangled purple dress with a knife in my hand, and I had to punch holes in the wall for a whole night. And it was a kind of amazing magic that belonged to Klaus, and I thought, this is a place to go to physicalize your imagery. So all these things were happening at once in a way that did not accrue to any aspect of appreciation or success. Rather to the contrary, we were considered kind of nutcases, but we were a very coherent group of such.
Nutcases.
Yeah.
And the artists can do whatever they want, right? This is what we've learned before.
Well, the exciting thing for me is that an artist gets to choose every day to say, your work, I can't do it today. It looks crazy. It's like some kind of weird crap. No, I think I can do, wait, I want to open this up. Oh, look at that blue. That's wild. Why isn't that working with these pieces of wood that I've been carrying around for a year? And off you go. You're in, it's for me, it's always a visionary proportion, and it shares so much of what David Reed mentioned, that intuition is, it's everything you know is intuition. Intuition isn't fluffy. Intuition is tough. Intuition saves your life. Intuition gives you purpose. So that's a very special kind of world to enter. But I think I should mention that David also saved a very important work of mine that I thought was not rigorous. It's called body collage, where I was collaging my body as an extension of my painting constructions. And they're big, complex installations. And then it's called I Body is the origination of that. And then body collage was where I collaged myself with glue and jumped into a pile of shredded paper. And I thought it's too, I don't know, it's too self-forgiving, it's too self-evident. So I sat on it, I wouldn't show it, and then this guy, David Reed, looks at that and he says, this is really an important work. This is doing something, physicalizing collage and materiality, and I want to show it. And off it went into an exhibit David put together, and I said, yeah, I like it now. Yeah, this is good, this is good. So
I'm glad, yes, because I think that is actually one of the works that illustrates this kind of preoccupation with your painterly practice and kind of expanding it, introducing the body, as you said, with I Body, which is an amazing series of performative photographs. And I think that one is the other great example that kind of also helped me. So we have visual material, I shouldn't say we have because I'm not with the GRI anymore, but the Getty has visual material relating to that, and that helped me a lot understanding also the relation between performance and painting for you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 1968, and my cat Kitch is in it in a very nice way until the glue starts splattering, and then the cat gets up and walks past the camera. So.
It's too stinky. So thanks, David, for saving that. It was a very brilliant moment. I want to move on for a second to talk about two works. So we've addressed the issue of ephemeral works, of time-based works now. Kind of the archive is a way to, I don't want to say preserve them, but a way to access them after they had transpired, they had taken place. And in some instances, I want to talk about two examples with you. You have done performance works that then kind of transformed or expanded into other more manifest works of art. One is Up to and Including Her Limits, and the other one is Fresh Blood, which is one of my favorites. So Up to and Including Her Limits, just want to update us here. I included some photographs, was performed several times. And
many times, actually. I decided to do it as often as possible, but it started very simply at home with my neighbor, the arborist, trimming my apple tree, and he had 3/4-inch manila rope, which I used for water needle, and a harness that looked like that would be nice to sit in that, and I could do tree surgeon knots and pull myself up and down, and then I found that in the harness, being completely concentrated and relaxed without moving, the rope took some strange energy and would move me when I didn't expect it. So this all started in the front of the house with the apple tree.
So I think, if I understand correctly, that is kind of an exercise image that is in nature, and then I've included some more examples to show you the different iterations. So they're more always different lighting, always different scenarios. So it's a very vibrant work, and I find it very interesting because it shows kind of, again, this interest of the body's movement, expansion into space, and then ultimately interaction with space, because you start kind of marking.
And then it
the
becomes
environment.
another way to escape my drawing habits. I realized that once I'm extending my arms with crayons in a fixed space, I can build a whole network of time factoring. Yeah. Strokes, and so off it goes,
So because, again, as you know by now, I'm very excited about the documentation and prep material. So I've included some scores and some drawings to, again, show you kind of the variety of material you would find in the archive. And then ultimately, there are more examples. These beautiful drawings. And then ultimately, kind of the installation, I don't want to say end, but kind of the installation version of the performance.
Well, the question was, how can I replace my body? I wanted to do this work for so many different places at so many different times. And then how could it exist without me? And that became the source of my editing all these various iterations. And I was able to decide that installing one of the drawings with 6 monitors would replace the live action.
And then important, the harness in the middle that kind of is like almost like notes the absence of the body, but that the traces still speak of the presence. So
and the projector, the empty projection light,
The other work that kind of has this installation component or grew into an installation is Fresh Blood. I will show a couple of pictures in a moment, but I would just be interested to hear kind of if what the relationship between the performative act and then the performative act moving into a manifest version is.
Do you have the little image of the bouquet of leaves?
Yes.
And the,
I'm sorry. Okay, here.
Yeah, this was a dream that would preoccupy me for 10 years. It was a very simple dream, but it was a menstrual dream that woke me up. And in the dream, I was given a bouquet of dried leaves with little babies. They're dried babies in them. And that shape is like this with the stems on the bottom. And in addition to the dried leaves, I was given an umbrella with the handle on the bottom and the shape this way. So I kept drawing this configuration, this sort of vulvic repetition. And it's a very funny dream because I take the dried bouquet of leaves to the office of a famous Venetian veterinarian, and I leave the bouquet on his desk. And then on the way there, I'm carrying the umbrella with the curve, and I accidentally sort of stab a man in the thigh who's in the English taxi with me, and that's how he can bleed. Because contrary to the facts of life, patriarchy has always invented these sort of menstrual fantasies where the guy bleeds from his head, he has an extra rib to create with. So this was my distorted version of that inheritance. Then I began to build, do we have another slide of the vocabulary image?
That is.
Well, yeah, along the way I collect sort of a universe of these permutated V shapes. So the umbrella and the dried leaves keep attracting other kind of figurations. And they belong to nature, to the body, to spirit elements. It's a whole big archive. And then I realized that as I'm writing this essay about menstrual taboos, if I project the vocabulary of images that I've collected, I could move within them and recite the text or overtape it. So it keeps going, and then it's going to become an installation, Venus vectors. Well, that's a sketch for it. I'm going to print the vocabulary onto these large interconnected panels. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. So the works that we're just looking at were just recently at my retrospective at PS1, MoMA PS1. And that was amazing to have 300 works, right? 300 works, yeah.
It was a wonderful exhibition also because it was so comprehensive. It was
Yeah.
really just focusing on all the artistic media you work in and painting a very comprehensive picture. And Venus Vectors was in it.
Yes.
It was the first time that I had seen it live. And I just keep wondering with the two, the Up to and Including Her Limits and Fresh Blood, both of which went from performance into kind of a manifest form. That doesn't obviously happen with all of the works. So it's some of the works. And can you talk a little bit about why these works, why not others? Is there a thought of maybe preserving those, or is it really just in the case of Fresh Blood, for example, we had talked about it before, where you said, no, it was just not finished with the performance?
It's really a kind of thoughtful engagement where some forms can keep extending themselves or question their solution. What kind of final depiction can this enter? Yeah.
I want us to move on now, because I also want to make sure that we have time for Q&A, because I know that there will be many questions. I want us to move on now to your paintings.
Yeah.
Because you and Christian, you have a conversation, and I think actually an ongoing engagement with preserving the preservation of your paintings, and I'm always very intrigued by your paintings. The kind of, the notion of expanding the two-dimensional space of a painting, also the kinetic idea. So if you would just talk a little bit about your idea of painting, and maybe also your thinking about the future of your works. And I mean, there are many material, many techniques involved. You talked about these little kind of razor incisions that you did on the three figures.
Oh yes, but yeah.
And maybe also.
Well,
Christian
I'm here today, and it's a miracle because Christian Schneemann appreciates the work and has restored some of the desperately crumpled up, somewhat broken works with the most astute and thoughtful engagement with the materiality of things that I've chopped and hacked and torn apart, and that need to be still sustaining those aspects of their construction. This is all very hard won, and it's very recent. It's bewildering to me, and I'm so thrilled that there's so many of you here and that these are issues we can share. Because in my experience of art history, I was never to expect anything of this work to survive. And I had all the galleries that rejected me told me I had very low production behavior, because I couldn't afford it. If I did all the right framing and matting and got the expensive paints, I wouldn't be able to eat. So I made a very calculated choice that I'd do what I could. And sometimes there were serious problems where I live in my old farmhouse. A raccoon moved into the Meat Joy costumes. Mice were in my carefully sorted drawing shelves and chewed all the edges off of very significant prints and such. But I guess this is where I mentioned that this old house was left to me, and this is what I care about for my legacy more than anything else, because the house has been my muse. All these works, Meat Joy, Waterlight, Waterly, Fuses was shot there, and I'm still there. And every cat that was important to me is buried under the blue stones that lead the path to the door, including a cat from probably the 1700s that I didn't know was there, that's in the line. That was, whoa, okay, that's how it works. But so that's really the question of a conflict, of a legacy between the work and its place. And for me, the place is unique and completely central. None of this work would have happened because the house is actually a very mystical place that people who have come there and stayed there feel this welcome, this charge, this sense of being able to go into their dreams and their unconscious with it. Oh, here we are. This was a disaster. These two, yeah, they're not, there's too much light on them. Can we take the light down so we can see them better? Yo, up there, somebody? Yes, someone's responding, yay.
Here we are.
Okay, these
Indians.
are from my obsession with the destruction of Palestinian culture. I began working with ashes from my pot-bellied stove, and including fragments of computer chips. So there's a series, they're large, they look almost realistically sized there, but they were crumbled and crumpling. And I really wasn't able to show them until Christian got his paws on them and said there are certain things that could happen. They could flatten out. They won't be really flat, but he could save the dust. And so that's one of our wonderful collaborations that happened.
And I understood also the three figures.
Yeah,
something that
three
you have-
figures after Pontormo. This is a really, really early painting of mine. And one of the things that Christian understood was that I took a razor blade to my paint surfaces and I wanted to try to see what's beyond the intentionality of my painting. And so I was slicing my layers and I wanted them to be sustained. I wanted those slices to remain with the future of this work. And then, of course, the edges began to crumble. Mm-hmm. So you'll tell us what you did to save it, because I don't know exactly. But what did he say?
He said it's a secret. He won't tell anyone.
It's a secret. Okay, it's another homemade family secret. Yeah, it didn't have anything to do with lard or apples. No. So.
I lastly want to talk quickly. First of all, something that I almost forgot when I showed the slides about your archive and now how it's kept at the Getty Research Institute, and then also talking about the Carolee Schneemann Foundation. So now we really get into the issue of legacy. I mean, parting with your archive, which is such a personal and professional entity, and giving it away to an institute like the GRI is something that I keep thinking about, because, I mean, of course, it was a selection process, so we have to understand that not everything that Carolee has automatically, when she gave away her archive, went to the GRI or to Stanford. So it is an editing process involved. But still, I mean, in a sense, for researchers and for conservators also, this is like the holy grail, because this means that we, even beyond after an artist's passing, we have this for us to work on. I think I don't know if it was a difficult process for you, because again, it is so personal.
No, I'm so happy.
You cleaned house, right? You just made room for more archiving. That's what you've mentioned before.
Well, you're like my dream come true. Like, here's somebody, she cares about this, how incredible, and she's thoughtful and insightful, and I've had, some wonderful critical support through the years. But this is the first year when there's been kind of a worldly contextualization of the work. And I'm really not used to it. I'm really used to being told, we can't show this is crap, put your clothes back on. Your values are too particular. We don't think about the body anymore. Well, many things I could agree with critical theory, but it's been such a deep rejection history that I'm kind of stunned. Oh, it's very good, but and I'm so amazed that here you are with such a full, insightful appreciation. It's great. I'm thrilled.
Thank you.
She's in the woods all by herself here. Yeah.
But in fact, I got the statistics from the Getty Research Institute because so you have to check out the boxes. You have to, make a request. Then you get the box on a cart. Then you sit in this icy cold room and you work on these. And because there are many other projects that I work on, so every once in a while, like every week or so, I would be able to go down there and access the boxes. And every time I went down there, some of the boxes were gone because someone else had requested them. And so I asked about the statistics, and actually your archive was requested more than 2,200 times. So there is an enormous interest, and they keep track at the Getty as much as possible about all the, the kind of causes, the publications that come out, the exhibitions that material is lent to. So in a sense, that is really, I feel like, an ongoing external building of legacy.
The question, does this all have a future?
Yeah.
And as the artist, I can't be sure. I can't tell. One hopes so. I'm in David's camp for futurity and continuity, and that there's a cultural history that can have focus and use. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the foundation, the Carolee Schneemann Foundation, that is still, I think, if I understood correctly, and then I'm getting tired and we have to call it a night.
She's sleepy. She has jet lag from running all around the world. The foundation is the next sensible endeavor, and I have a wonderful board of academics, but I don't have anyone on the board who knows how to run a foundation. They don't know about the taxes, the fulfillment, all the details, and it's quite complex and specialized. And it takes a huge amount of confusing time trying to figure it out with an accountant, getting in trouble with the IRS, questioning my galleries who do not want to give attention or funding to saving the house. So, there's a dereliction there.
So it is.
So if anyone in this wonderful assemblage has good ideas, I'll be here for a while. Yeah. I'm really floundering with the foundation thing. I'm trying to get the rules of the game.
Yeah.
And they're quite, they're kind of mysteriously specialized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've heard it now from other people here that it is a very costly and very complicated endeavor, but I think everyone really hopes that you will keep going.
I hope so. Yeah.
So I think we should open up for questions. I know it's the end of the second day. I know there's a reception. So I want to end it from our side. And I don't know if, Christine, you want to? Okay, we'll do it. Okay.
I just want to tell Carolee, you're much too generous about me picking that piece. Carolee's talking about the High Times, Hard Times show. So Katie Siegel and I picked it together.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful piece. And we're very happy to have it in the show. And I'm always amazed in your descriptions of it. You leave out a part that really galvanizes the piece for a lot of people, which has to do with the imagery from the Vietnam War, which makes it such a provocative and emotional piece.
Well, it's very welcome, and it's just one of those surprises that seems serendipitous. I also had a big surprise going through the stacks in the country studio, and I found a work that I was sure I had burnt. I thought it was the worst thing I had ever made. It had every aesthetic problem unresolved. And I thought, this is great. This is really interesting. Ooh, I'm so happy it survived my criticism. So every now and then the artist recognizes some aspect that they were dumb.
Boy, do
What'd you say?
How long has the foundation been in the works? How long have you been?
Oh, thank you, Betsy. The foundation has been underway for about 2 years, just trying to get organized, and it takes so much devotion on the part of the participants. And I live in the Hudson Valley, and they're almost all in New York and a few in California. So just organizing is very, it's difficult, yeah.
There was one in the back, yes.
I wonder if you could speak more about the house that you described, because you refer to I guess, her. I don't know if there's a gender, but as a muse to you, your house and your home. And what role does it play in your art making and the essence of who you are as an artist? I wish you had a photo, but if you could speak to it.
Do we have a photo of it?
Not from the outside.
I love the question. It's a Huguenot stone house. It was built in 1750 with permission of the Lenapenedus. Some people from the Huguenot original settlement wanted to farm, and given the historic conditions, the native Lenape cited 3 homestead spaces where the Dubois brothers could build homes and farm. So it has this old, wonderful history. I came to it through a series of dreams when Jim Tenney and I were kind of squatting there. It belonged to relatives of mine whose farm had failed. They were about to auction the house, and in 1964-65, the old stone houses were often torn down because it was too intricate to repair the grout or repair them, and then a ranch house would be built on that landscape. So a series of dreams. This is sort of the favorite part of my process. I have a very angry man who sometimes turns up and tells me something I don't understand. And the remarkable part is that he tells me things I couldn't possibly know. With the house, he said, you don't know where you are, and you don't know what you're doing. Go downstairs and rip up the linoleum with a crowbar. He always tells me what tool to use. So I ripped up the linoleum, and he said, you will see a large chestnut floor. And we did that because we thought, our cousins don't care about the linoleum. And there was this beautiful flooring, these great big shiny golden beams. The second dream, we're still squatting in the house. He says, take a hammer, go upstairs, go downstairs, walk away from the front door, raise the hammer, stand here and smash the cement. It will fall down, and you will see a golden stone. I said, this is nuts. It sounds like a fairy tale. Jim Tenney says, yeah, well, we have to do it. So we took the hammer, we smashed the cement, it fell down, and we said, golden stone. It's a beautiful stone house. That's why the window ledges are so wide. Third dream, the angry, annoyed man says, go stand in the middle of the living area and smash the ceiling. And he says exactly where to go, and you will see a large chestnut beam. And I said, we shouldn't do that. This is a mess. How do we repair a ceiling? Jim said, we have to do it. So we're standing there covered in plaster dust, and there's this great, beautiful beam, chestnut beam, and we just kept going. The house is restored and breathing. It's not really modernized. People complain about not having a microwave and a laundry facility. The trees around it are often at least 100 years old. It's very magical. Mm-hmm. And so I was the most aggressive I've ever been. I think I went to my cousins and I said, Jim and I will save the house, even though we're just out of college. We don't have a job and we don't have any money, but we want to save the house. We'll do everything we can. And they went away to think about it. They came back with a lawnmower and some curtains and said, we'd like you to have the house. It makes you want to cry. So I'm still there. And everything you know about my work is from that space. Everything was dreamt there. Fuses was filmed there. And the guy turns up sometimes. I cannot invite him. He turned up with mortal coils. Some of you might have seen the installation. of projections of 17 friends who all died in the early 90s. And I couldn't solve that work. It was really making me crazy. And I wanted to use personal photographs of the friends who had died. And most of them were artists you would have heard of. It would include John Cage and Peter Moore and Hannah Wilke and friends in the art world. And then I was blowing up the photographs. A little gallery had no money, but I could use their space. And then I started having really annoying dreams, one of which was Hannah Wilke saying very aggressively, "Do not put me next to Paul Sharits." So now I'm getting crap from my dead friends. Then at one point, the angry guy turned up and he said, "You're not understanding this. This has to be a projection, 3/4 inch Miller rope, 6 RPM. I said, "Oh, I get it. Okay, everybody gets a rope, and it's turning, and the projection goes through this realm of ropes." So there's more that he's worked on, but this was a very satisfying collaboration. Yeah. So thanks for that question. It's a big one.
It's a magical house, truly.
Yeah.
Is.
Well, I have a question for you, Anja. Why this work out of all the other collections in the Getty? Is that just some affiliation for all this material, or
Why which work? Why the
mine instead of everybody else in the Getty's archive?
Have you seen your own archive? It is
Sure.
it is so magnificent that and it, you know, I mean, I studied your work obviously. I saw it in exhibitions. I read about it, and you think you know it. You know the performances and all the, But then you go into the archive, and it's so daunting at first because you don't know what to do with it. You're all of a sudden immersed in this personal and professional world of someone, and I started looking at material with performances or works that I wasn't as familiar with, only by means of its preparatory material and not by the kind of final physical enactment, because I just got curious about what does it look like if I don't have the visual? What picture will my mind paint? And that was like such an exciting discovery process, and there were so many different aspects, different media. It is so artistic, it is so aesthetic, that I just couldn't stop. I don't know. I mean, it's 123 boxes at the Getty, and I've seen I don't know how many from Stanford.
Oh.
And I wish I had more time, and I will go back and do more research on it. But it's just a work of art in itself, and I felt incredibly, and I still feel incredibly privileged to be able to access it and to have you to talk about it. I mean, that's the best thing that can happen.
Thank you so much. I'm so blessed with you. I have a question for the audience. There's someone, this guy here, who are you that's documenting every moment?
They're really documenting, but this is the way I take notes when I come to meetings.
What do we think about that?
Oh, we're being filmed
Yeah, but
anyway.
here's a freelance accumulator.
You can see my crazy archive.
For his archive.
Totally disorganized. I never go farther than me.
I want to have this question quickly, and then I think we have to end it, right? Yes, we have to wrap it up. But yes.
I'll be very quick.
Yes.
During the talk, you described the archive as a generator of work, and then also your dreams as a generator of work. And I was wondering if there is a connection or some sort of relationship between the process of going into an archive and generating something and the process of remembering your dreams and generating something.
Question for Carolee, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's for you. What was the question? I didn't quite get it.
The question, she was interested in kind of dreams as a generator for work, or kind of an inspiration for work, or also the archival material, going maybe back into the archive, or looking at your own archival material, if there is a connection, right, or if kind of these different sources of inspiration for you. She was interested in that.
Well, I'm very gratified by the preservation of the early work, and it's exciting to see it. But I have to go forward. I don't feel a deep attachment in the moment to it. It's just like a huge relief. It's a big undertaking, and I'm just so blessed that it has, all this material has a potential home, and that it can be of use and of interest. And then I'm dealing with all the current mess of clipping and archive and potential work.
And keeping on dreaming.
Well, that's unpredictable. The dreams don't offer themselves. I have to be available when they choose to turn up. So thank you, everybody. This is just
Thank you,
wonderful.
everybody.
Thank you, Anja.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good.